I came home early that day. The sun was still pouring through the windows, casting soft golden stripes across the living room floor. I remember thinking how peaceful it looked, the house I'd built with my own hands, the same home where laughter once echoed and family dinners felt sacred. But that calm was shattered the moment I stepped through the door. From the hallway I could hear voices, low, urgent whispers coming from the living room, my wife's voice, and another, my son's fiancé. At first, I smiled to myself. Maybe they were planning a surprise for my son's birthday next week. Maybe they were bonding, which made me proud in a quiet, fatherly way. But then I heard it. The tone in their voices wasn't light or joyful, it was tense, almost fearful, and then I heard my wife's trembling whisper. "He can't ever know." I froze. My hand tightened on the doorknob. The words sank into me like ice. I leaned slightly forward, just enough to see them through the small reflection in the mirror across the hall. My wife was sitting on the couch, her face pale and eyes glossy with tears. My son's fiancé sat beside her, gripping her hand tightly. Before I could even understand what I was seeing, the fiancé said softly, "I'm scared. What if he finds out?" My wife squeezed her hand and whispered back, "We'll handle it. But you must never tell him. He can't find out. Ever." I felt my heart stumble inside my chest. What were they hiding from me? What secret could possibly make my wife look so afraid, and my future daughter-in-law so desperate? For a moment, I thought maybe I'd misheard. Maybe it was something harmless, something that had nothing to do with me. But their faces, their tone, every instinct screamed that this wasn't innocent. I took one quiet step backward. My shoe pressed against the tile, and the faint creak made my heart stop. I held my breath, waiting, but they didn't notice. I swallowed hard and turned away, my mind spinning. My first thought wasn't anger. It was confusion. Then fear. Then that old ache that had never fully healed, the fear of losing family again. My name is Richard. I'm 56 years old. I run a small carpentry business in town. For most of my life I've believed in two things: hard work and loyalty. My wife Claire had been my partner through everything. We built this home together. We raised our son Daniel through every storm life threw at us. When Claire came into my life, I was a man still picking up the pieces of my youth, working long nights, dreaming of stability. She gave me purpose, and Daniel gave me reason. I thought I had everything a man could ever ask for. Until this moment. I stood in the kitchen, leaning on the counter, trying to steady my breathing. The faint smell of coffee lingered in the air, mixed with something sweet from the bakery box on the counter. My wife's favorite pastries. I had bought them that morning, planning to surprise her. But now the word secret rang louder in my mind than anything else. I never imagined the two people I trusted most would destroy everything I love. Please, like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. Because what happened next changed my life forever. I took another slow breath and peered around the corner. They were still sitting close together. Too close. My wife brushed the younger woman's hair away gently, like a mother comforting a child. And then the fiancé whispered something that made my blood run cold. "What if he finds out we're related?" My heart nearly stopped. My fingers went numb. I stepped back into the shadow of the hallway, gripping the wall for balance. Related? What did that mean? How could my wife and my son's fiancé possibly be related? 1,000 thoughts rushed through my head, colliding, scattering, making no sense. Had I misheard? Was this some twisted misunderstanding? Or had my entire life, my marriage, my family had been built on a lie? I didn't know how long I stood there, staring at the soft glow of the living room light spilling across the floor. I could hear the hum of the refrigerator, the distant ticking of the wall clock. Time felt like it had stopped, and yet my heartbeat roared in my ears like thunder. I thought of Daniel, my boy, my pride. The son I had raised to be kind, hard-working, decent, the man who was just weeks away from marrying the love of his life. The thought of him standing at that altar, completely unaware of what I'd just heard, made my stomach twist. No father should ever have to carry a secret like that. I backed away quietly, step by step, until I reached the doorway to my workshop. I closed the door behind me, sank into the wooden chair, and pressed my hands against my face. My mind kept replaying those words. He can't ever know. I needed to understand. I needed the truth. But if what I feared was real, how could I even begin to face it? Through the thin wall, I could still hear their voices, muffled now, softer, like whispers meant for ghosts. Claire said, "We can't tell him. He wouldn't survive it." The younger woman replied, her voice cracking, "Neither will I if I have to keep pretending." That was when something inside me broke. The fear turned into something else, a cold, burning determination. Whatever this secret was, I was going to uncover it. No matter how painful, no matter how deep it went, because if my wife was hiding something that could destroy my son's life, then I had already lost too much to let this go unanswered. As I stood there, in the doorway of my own home, watching the two women whisper like strangers in a house built on love, I realized the truth I'd been running from my entire life. The ones you trust most are the ones who can shatter you the deepest. And before that day ended, I'd find out just how deep that betrayal ran. The night after I heard those whispers, I didn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them, my wife and my son's fiancé, holding hands in our living room, whispering words that would not leave my head. He can't ever know. And worse, what if he finds out we're related? I sat in my workshop until dawn, surrounded by the smell of sawdust and old varnish. My tools lay scattered across the bench, untouched. That little space had always been my refuge, a world where everything made sense. You measure, you cut, you build, you fix. But there was no fixing this kind of damage. When the first rays of sunlight crept through the blinds, I closed my eyes and went back in time. Back to when life was simple, when love still meant safety. I still remember the day I first met Claire. She was standing in front of a local hardware store, arguing with the clerk about a refund. I couldn't help but laugh. She turned around, eyes sharp, but then she smiled. That smile. It disarmed me completely. I offered to help even though I had no idea how. That was how our story began. A carpenter and a schoolteacher. Both stubborn, both broke, both dreamers. We got married in a small church, just us and a few friends. We didn't have much. An old car, a rented apartment, and a dream of building something that would last longer than either of us. And somehow we did. I opened a tiny carpentry shop out of our garage. Claire would stay up late helping me paint signs, balance books, or deliver furniture in her old station wagon. On weekends, we'd sit on the porch, counting every dollar we'd saved, laughing about how we'd someday tell our children this story. Those were the years when happiness came in small doses. A shared sandwich, a night under the stars, a dream whispered in the dark. When Daniel was born, our world changed. I remember holding him for the first time, his tiny hand wrapping around my finger. I'd never known love could feel that fragile and that powerful. Claire looked at me that night and said something I'd never forget. "Family is sacred, Richard. No matter how hard life gets, we protect it." I built my life around those words. Our home grew with our love. Claire would cook in the kitchen while Daniel played with wooden toy cars I made for him in the shop. Every birthday we had the same tradition. She'd bake his favorite chocolate cake, and I'd make him something by hand. A rocking horse, a bookshelf, a little wooden box with his initials carved on top. There was one night I'll never forget, the night we almost lost everything. A storm had rolled in without warning. The river overflowed, flooding half our neighborhood. The shop was knee-deep in water, tools floating, everything we'd built slipping away. I remember falling to my knees, exhausted, ready to give up. But Claire. She grabbed my hand, looked me in the eye and said, "Then we'll rebuild it, together." And we did. That's who she was. My anchor, my compass. Years passed, and Daniel grew into a good man, smart, kind, ambitious. He reminded me so much of her. When he introduced me to his fiancée, I saw the same spark in his eyes that I once had for Claire. I thought maybe life had come full circle. Her name was Emily. Bright, polite, always smiling. She seemed perfect for him. Claire adored her instantly. At least, that's what I thought. The first time Emily came over for dinner, I noticed something odd. She kept glancing at Claire in a way I couldn't explain. Not admiration, not affection, but something else. Familiarity, like she already knew her. When I teased her about how quickly she'd become comfortable in our home, she laughed nervously and said, "Oh, I don't know why, but I feel like I've known your wife forever." We all chuckled. Claire brushed it off, saying, "Well, maybe it's fate." But I remember that moment vividly, how Emily's eyes flickered with something that wasn't just amusement, it was recognition. I didn't think much of it then, I was too busy feeling grateful. After years of scraping by, life finally felt balanced. Daniel was engaged, the business was thriving, and Claire seemed happy. But looking back now, that was the first crack in the glass. I can still picture that dinner, the warm glow of the chandelier above us, the sound of Daniel's laughter echoing through the house, the faint clinking of cutlery. I thought that was the sound of family. But maybe, even then, it was the sound of secrets being buried beneath comfort. After that night, small things started to feel off. I'd walk into a room and conversations would stop. Claire would spend more time with Emily than with me. She'd cancel plans, whisper on the phone, stay out later, helping with wedding arrangements. And yet, she never lied. Not directly. She just avoided telling me the truth. My younger brother, Thomas, my closest friend and partner in the carpentry shop, noticed the change too. One evening he said, "Rich, you look tired. Everything okay at home?" I smiled weakly and said, "Just the usual family chaos." But he didn't believe me. He never did. Thomas had always been protective of me. He knew how much Claire meant to me, how I'd built my life around her. I remember his words clearly. Sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones we should keep an eye on. At the time, I laughed it off. But now those words echo louder than ever. That same week, Emily came by the workshop to pick something up. She looked nervous, distracted. As she thanked me for a gift I'd made for their new home, she said something that made me freeze. "I guess it runs in the family. Your wife's generosity, I mean." I frowned. "How do you mean?" Her face went pale. "Oh, nothing, just you both have kind hearts." She forced a laugh and quickly changed the subject. That night, I told Claire what she said. For a brief second, her face tightened, panic flashing in her eyes, but she smiled it away, saying, "You're reading too much into it." Maybe I was, maybe I wasn't. Because now, when I think about those moments, the familiarity, the strange glances, the nervous laughter, I can't help but feel that the truth was always there, hiding in plain sight. And as I sat in my workshop staring at the family photo on the shelf, Claire, me and Daniel, I realized something I didn't want to admit. That familiarity Emily felt around my wife wasn't emotional. It was literal. She didn't just know Claire, she was connected to her, by blood or by secret. And soon I was going to find out exactly how deep that connection went. The first time my son brought Emily home, I remember feeling proud. Daniel had that same glow I used to have when I first fell in love with Claire. That quiet excitement you can't hide. That tremble in your smile when you look at the person you think you'll spend your life with. He walked in with his arm around her, introducing her like she was a blessing he couldn't wait to share. "Dad, this is Emily," he said with that wide grin of his. "She's the one." I remember standing there in the doorway, wiping sawdust off my hands, smiling as warmly as I could. "Welcome home," I said. But something changed the moment she stepped into the living room. Claire froze. It was quick, so quick that anyone else would have missed it. But I've known my wife for over 25 years. I can read every twitch of her face, every flicker in her eyes. For that fraction of a second, I saw something. Fear, maybe recognition. And Emily. She noticed it too. Her smile faltered. She looked at Claire like someone seeing a ghost. The air shifted. The warmth drained out of the room. I chuckled awkwardly to break the silence, saying, "Well, let's get you two seated. Claire's made her famous lasagna. You're in for a treat." We all sat at the dining table, pretending nothing was wrong. The chandelier hummed softly above, the smell of baked cheese filling the air, but there was no laughter, just small talk and stolen glances. Claire's hand shook slightly as she poured the wine. Emily's fingers fidgeted with her napkin. Daniel, blissfully unaware, kept talking about the new house he and Emily were planning to move into. I tried to focus on the moment, on the joy of seeing my son happy, but that uneasy silence kept creeping back. Something unspoken was alive at that table, breathing between us. After dinner, Claire offered to make coffee. Emily quickly stood up and said, "Let me help." I watched them disappear into the kitchen, and something in my gut twisted. The sound of muffled voices reached me, low, strained. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. Tension. When they returned, Claire's eyes were red. Emily's lips were pressed into a tight smile. I didn't ask what happened. I didn't want to start a fight. That night, after Daniel and Emily left, I asked Claire if everything was all right. She gave a small laugh, too forced, too fragile, and said, "It's nothing. She just reminds me of someone." Then she walked away before I could ask who. I told myself it was stress, wedding planning maybe. I tried not to read into it, but over the next few weeks, the cracks only deepened. Every time Emily visited, Claire would find an excuse to leave the room. Sometimes she'd retreat to the garden, pretending to water the plants. Other times she'd suddenly remember a phone call she needed to make. Emily, on the other hand, looked increasingly uncomfortable. She avoided eye contact with Claire but always greeted me politely. Too politely, almost rehearsed. The tension was thick enough to choke on. One evening I was sitting on the porch with my old friend Thomas, the one who'd been with me through everything. He'd stopped by for a drink and, as usual, he noticed what I was trying to ignore. He took a sip of beer, glanced at the house and said quietly, "Something's off, Rich." I frowned. "You noticed too?" He nodded slowly. "I don't know what it is, but your wife, she's hiding something. I saw her face when that girl came by. That wasn't discomfort. That was guilt." I tried to laugh it off, but his words stuck like a splinter under my skin. The next morning I noticed Claire had started locking her phone. She'd never done that before. When I asked why, she brushed it off. "Everyone deserves a little privacy," she said. Maybe she was right. Maybe I was overthinking everything, but the lies always start with maybe. A few days later, I found her sitting in the living room, holding an old photo album, the one with pictures from her college days. When I walked in, she quickly shut it and forced a smile. "What's that?" I asked gently. "Just memories," she said, standing up too fast. But I caught a glimpse before she closed it, a picture of her, younger, standing with a man who looked oddly familiar. He had Emily's eyes. I didn't say anything, not yet. That night, I called Thomas again. "You ever get that feeling where everything around you looks the same but feels wrong?" I asked. He didn't hesitate. "Every time someone lies to your face." His words hit harder than I expected. The next few weeks felt like living inside a storm that hadn't broken yet. Claire was quieter, more withdrawn. Emily avoided family dinners altogether, saying she was busy. Daniel brushed it off, saying wedding stress was getting to her. But something told me this wasn't about the wedding. One night I got home early from the workshop. The house was dim, just a soft lamp glowing in the corner. I could hear Claire's voice coming from the bedroom. At first I thought she was on the phone, but then I realized she was crying. I stopped outside the door, my hand frozen on the knob. Her voice broke through the silence. "I can't do this anymore. If he ever learns the truth, everything will fall apart." My heart stopped. There was no reply, just silence. Then a quiet sob. I backed away slowly, my breath caught in my throat. My legs felt weak, my mind spinning. Who was she talking to? Emily? Someone else? What truth? I sat on the staircase for what felt like hours, the echo of her voice repeating in my head. When she finally came out, I pretended to be asleep on the couch. She walked past me, quietly, her footsteps heavy with guilt, and I lay there staring at the ceiling, realizing something terrifying. Whatever secret she was keeping, it wasn't just about the past, it was still alive. And if she was willing to protect it with tears and lies, it meant that truth could destroy everything we built. That night, I didn't close my eyes. Because for the first time I realized I wasn't afraid of what I'd find. I was afraid of what I already knew. It started subtly at first. Changes so small I almost convinced myself they were normal. Claire began drifting away from me, like a tide quietly pulling back from the shore. The woman who once filled our home with warmth now moved through it like a shadow. She avoided my gaze. Meals grew quieter, the little touches, her hand on my shoulder, her goodnight kiss, faded into silence. Even Emily, my son's fiancée, began to act strangely. Every time I entered a room, she'd look startled, as if caught doing something wrong. She stopped making small talk, barely smiled, and always seemed in a hurry to leave. The house, once filled with laughter and life, felt colder with each passing day. Even the twins, the dogs we'd raised since Daniel was in high school, seemed unsettled, whining near the stairs where Claire used to sit every evening with her tea. I told myself it was stress. The wedding was just weeks away. Everyone was tired. Everyone was nervous, but no matter how hard I tried to believe that, the truth sat heavy on my chest. Something was wrong, and whatever it was, they were hiding it together. One Sunday morning, as I walked into the living room, I noticed something odd. The old family photo albums, the ones that sat neatly stacked on the shelf, were gone. I checked the cabinet where I kept important papers, birth certificates, our house deed, insurance forms, and found them shuffled out of order. Someone had been going through them. My pulse quickened. "Claire?" I called out. No answer. I found her in the kitchen stirring a pot of soup like nothing was wrong. "Did you move the albums?" I asked casually. She didn't look up. "I was just cleaning." Her tone was flat, clipped. Cleaning doesn't explain why half the papers from the safe are missing. Her spoon clattered against the pot. She turned sharply, eyes flashing for the first time in weeks. "Richard, I told you I'm organizing things for the wedding. Can we not make everything an interrogation?" Before I could respond, she stormed off, muttering something under her breath. That night I called Thomas, my old friend and closest ally. He'd been keeping his distance since things got strange, but he always knew when something was eating me alive. "I think Claire's hiding something from me," I said. He sighed softly on the other end. "You think it's about that girl again?" Yes. And no. It feels bigger, like they're both protecting the same secret. Thomas hesitated. "You won't like what I'm about to say, but I saw them." I froze. "What do you mean?" He exhaled slowly. "Last week, downtown cafe, Claire and Emily, alone. They were sitting in the corner booth, talking quietly. It didn't look like a friendly chat, more like negotiation." My stomach twisted. He continued. "She handed Emily something, an envelope. I couldn't see what was inside." The room tilted. My hand clenched around the phone. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I wasn't sure. I hoped it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. The next morning I tried to confront Claire gently. I waited until breakfast when Daniel was upstairs getting ready for work. I placed my hand over hers and asked, "Were you with Emily yesterday?" She froze, eyes flicking up for just a moment before she smiled. Too quickly. "Yes," she said lightly. "We were finalizing some decorations." "Why?" I didn't answer right away. Instead, I watched her hand tremble slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "You could have told me," I said. She shrugged. "You've been busy." Busy. That word stung. Busy keeping this family together. Busy pretending everything was fine while the walls cracked around me. A few hours later, Daniel came to me, worry clouding his face. "Dad," he said quietly, "what's going on between you and Mom?" Emily says she feels like you don't like her anymore. I wanted to scream that I wanted to like her, that I wanted to trust her, but every instinct in me screamed otherwise. Instead, I forced a smile. It's just pre-wedding nerves, son. Nothing to worry about. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The memory of Claire and Emily whispering in my living room replayed over and over. He can't ever know. Those words echoed like a curse. Something inside me broke. I needed answers. When Claire finally drifted off beside me, I slipped out of bed and walked quietly to her study. The room smelled faintly of her perfume and old paper. Moonlight spilled through the half-open blinds, casting silver lines across the desk. I opened the drawers carefully. Receipts, envelopes, loose change. Nothing unusual. But then, tucked beneath a stack of old letters, I found one envelope different from the rest. It was yellowed, edges curled. No name, no address. Just for me, written in her handwriting. My throat tightened. I opened it slowly. Inside was an old photograph, a woman, Claire, younger, smiling. And beside her, a small child. A little girl with light hair, soft brown eyes, and the same dimple on the right cheek that Emily had. My vision blurred. My knees nearly gave out. I sank into the chair, staring at the picture as the truth began to dawn. That look Claire gave Emily the first day they met. The fear, the guilt, the silence. It all made sense now. Emily wasn't just my son's fiancée. She was connected to Claire. Somehow, some way, she was part of her past. I turned the photo over. On the back, written in faded ink, were 3 words that made my blood run cold. My little girl. My heart pounded in my chest. The air felt too thick to breathe. All this time, Claire's secret hadn't been about betrayal in the usual sense. It was worse. Something bound those 2 women together by blood, by guilt, by a past she never told me about. I looked at her sleeping silhouette through the doorway, peaceful, almost angelic under the lamplight. How long had she carried this lie? How long had she watched our son fall in love with someone he should never have touched? The envelope trembled in my hands. Outside, the wind howled softly through the trees. And in that moment, I knew this wasn't the end of my pain. It was just the beginning of a truth that would shatter my family apart. I didn't sleep that night, not a single second. That photograph burned itself into my mind. The smile on Claire's face, the little girl by her side, the words on the back, my little girl. The woman I'd shared my life with for over 20 years had carried a secret so enormous it could destroy us all. And now that secret had come home wearing a wedding dress. By sunrise, my hands were trembling. Not from exhaustion, but from fury wrapped in disbelief. I needed proof. I needed to know that what I feared wasn't real. But deep down, I already knew. Still, I went searching anyway. Because a father doesn't destroy his family on a hunch. He finds the truth, even if it kills him inside. I waited until Claire left to run errands. Daniel had gone to the gym and Emily was at the boutique finalizing last-minute wedding details. The house was silent except for the ticking of the clock above the fireplace. I walked into the small storage room connected to her study, one she rarely let anyone touch. Boxes lined the walls, labeled with dates and cryptic words. Medical, old letters, receipts. I opened the first box carefully. Dust rose like a ghost between us. Bills, papers, nothing unusual. The second box held old photographs. Vacations, family gatherings, my son's childhood birthdays. Then, beneath a thick folder marked private, I found it. A small stack of official-looking documents yellowed with age. The first one I pulled out was a birth certificate. I felt my pulse hammer in my ears. Name of mother, Claire Thompson. Father, unknown. Child's name, Emily Carter. My breath caught. My hands began to shake so badly I nearly dropped the paper. I flipped to the next page, hospital discharge records from 24 years ago. Claire had been admitted for childbirth. The dates lined up exactly with the timeline she'd once told me she was away visiting family. All this time she'd lied. She'd had a child before we met, a child she abandoned, and now, by some cruel twist of fate, that child, her child, had found her way back into our lives as my son's fiancée. The walls seemed to close in. My legs buckled as I sat on the cold floor, papers scattered around me. I saw flashes of the past. Our wedding, her laughter, the way she'd always avoided talking about her teenage years. The way her face had gone pale when Daniel first introduced Emily, how she'd stammered, how she couldn't meet the girl's eyes. Now I knew why. My chest ached. I wanted to scream, to tear the walls apart, to demand why. But all that came out was a whisper. "Claire, how could you?" I sat there for what felt like hours, drowning in the memories of everything we'd built together, realizing it was all built on a lie. Eventually, I picked up the phone and called Thomas. He answered on the first ring. "Richard, you sound awful." I could barely get the words out. She had another child, Tom, before we met. It's Emily." There was silence on the other end, long, heavy, suffocating silence. When he finally spoke, his voice was grave. "You're sure?" "I have the documents. Her name, the dates, everything matches." He let out a breath. "You have to stop that wedding. I can't just walk in and destroy my son's life without proof he'll believe. What if—" "Richard," he interrupted softly, "you already have proof. The truth doesn't need your permission, it's sitting in your hands." I didn't answer. My throat felt tight. He continued, "If you stay silent, your son will marry his own half-sister. And when the truth comes out later, and it will, it'll destroy him, destroy all of you." His words pierced through the fog of my confusion. My heart knew he was right. But my soul still resisted. Because no matter what she had done, Claire was still my wife. And Emily, she didn't know. She was just a victim of fate, of secrets buried before she was even born. How could I tell Daniel that the woman he loved, the one he was set to marry tomorrow, shared the same blood as him? How could I shatter his happiness even if it was built on sin? I pressed my palms to my eyes and groaned. This was beyond betrayal. This was tragedy. That evening, I confronted Claire. She walked in carrying groceries, humming softly, oblivious to the storm brewing inside me. I held up the papers wordlessly. Her smile vanished. The bags dropped from her hands, apples rolling across the floor. "Where did you find that?" she whispered. "In your study," I said coldly, "in a box labelled private. Fitting name, don't you think?" She took a shaky step toward me. "Richard, please." "Is it true?" My voice broke. "Is she your daughter?" Tears welled in her eyes. "I was young. I made mistakes. I didn't know how to tell you. I thought she was gone forever. I never thought—" "Never thought what?" I snapped. "That fate would bring her back into our son's life? That they'd fall in love?" She sobbed. "I wanted to tell you, but every time I tried, I saw how happy Daniel was. I couldn't take that away from him." "You already have," I said, my tone hollow. "You just don't see it yet." We stood in silence, the sound of her crying filling the room like rain. I wanted to hate her, but all I felt was exhaustion, a deep, soul-crushing weariness. She tried to reach for me, but I stepped back. "I can't even look at you right now," she whispered. "Please don't tell him. Let the wedding happen. We'll figure something out." Her words froze me in place. "Let the wedding happen?" I repeated, disbelief in my voice. "You're asking me to let my son marry his sister?" Her lips quivered. "He doesn't have to know." That was the moment I realized how far she'd fallen, how blind guilt and fear had made her. Without another word, I turned away. In the living room, the table was covered in white envelopes, golden ribbons, and stacks of elegant invitations. On top of the pile sat one addressed to me. "Mr. and Mrs. Richard Thompson are cordially invited to the wedding of Daniel Thompson and Emily Carter." I stared at it for a long moment. The weight of the paper in my hand felt heavier than stone. The ceremony was tomorrow, and by tomorrow night, if I didn't stop it, my son would marry his half-sister. I folded the invitation slowly, my jaw tight, my heart fractured. Then I whispered into the empty room, "Tomorrow. Everything changes." The next morning felt unreal. Sunlight streamed through the curtains, but it couldn't reach me. It was the kind of day meant for celebration. Soft breeze, clear sky, church bells echoing in the distance, yet every sound cut through me like a blade. I dressed in silence. The mirror reflected a man I barely recognized. Grey eyes, hollow cheeks, lips pressed tight against the storm brewing inside. In my breast pocket sat the envelope, the photograph, the birth certificate, every piece of truth I wished I never had to carry. When I arrived at the venue, music floated through the air. The garden was decorated beautifully. Rows of white chairs, golden ribbons, a floral arch blooming under the sunlight. Guests chatted, laughed, and took photos, completely unaware that the happiest day of my son's life was about to collapse. Claire stood near the front, radiant in a pastel dress, though her smile trembled. She avoided my gaze. Emily was stunning. Her white gown shimmered like morning frost. She looked nervous, but her eyes softened when they met Daniel's. He looked at her like she was the center of his universe. And I felt my heart break for him all over again. The ceremony began. The priest's voice carried over the crowd, calm and melodic. "We gather here today to unite two souls in holy matrimony." Daniel and Emily joined hands. The world seemed to hold its breath. My palms grew damp, my heartbeat thundered in my ears. I reached into my jacket pocket, my fingers brushing the edge of the photograph. My throat felt dry, my chest heavy. I heard Thomas's voice in my head. "If you stay silent, you'll destroy them both." The priest continued, "If anyone here objects to this union, speak now or forever hold your peace." The words rang out like a gunshot. And before I could think, before fear could stop me, I stood. Stop. Every head turned. The music stopped. The silence that followed was deafening. Claire's face went pale. Daniel frowned in confusion. "Dad?" I took a step forward, my voice shaking but clear. "This wedding cannot happen." Gasps rippled through the guests. Murmurs spread like wildfire. The priest froze mid-sentence, eyes wide. Daniel's brow furrowed. "What are you talking about?" I reached into my pocket and held up the envelope. "Because the woman you're about to marry is your half-sister." The world seemed to collapse in slow motion. Emily's bouquet slipped from her hands and hit the floor with a dull thud. Daniel blinked, stunned as if I'd spoken a foreign language. "What?" he whispered. Claire stumbled forward, her voice cracking. "Richard, please don't do this." But I kept going. The words poured out like poison I could no longer hold. 24 years ago, before your mother met me, she gave birth to a baby girl, a girl she abandoned, a girl named Emily Carter. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Claire's hands trembled violently as tears streamed down her face. I was young. I was scared. I pulled out the photograph and documents, holding them for everyone to see. "Here's the proof. The hospital records, the birth certificate, the dates match, the name matches. She hid this from all of us." Emily's knees buckled. A bridesmaid caught her before she fell. Her face drained of colour, her lips quivering. No, that can't be true." Claire reached out desperately. "Emily, please, listen to me." But Emily stepped back, shaking her head. "You're my mother." Her voice broke into a sob. "You let me fall in love with my own brother." The guests were whispering now, some covering their mouths, others watching in stunned disbelief. Daniel's face twisted in horror. "Mum, tell me he's lying." Claire collapsed to her knees. "I never meant for this to happen," she cried. "I thought she was gone. When she came back into our lives, I didn't know how to stop it." I slammed my fist on the podium. "You didn't stop it because you were afraid of losing the perfect image you built. You were willing to let our son marry his sister just to keep your secret buried." She covered her face, sobbing uncontrollably. Daniel staggered backward, his chest heaving. I don't understand. This can't be real." I walked up to him and gently placed the papers in his trembling hands. "It's real, son. I wish to God it wasn't. But it's the truth." He looked at the documents, then at Emily, then at his mother. His expression changed from confusion to heartbreak, then to pure rage. "You lied to me," he whispered. "All my life, you lied to me." Emily fell to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, her white gown pooling around her like a shroud. "I didn't know, I swear I didn't know." Claire crawled toward Daniel, grabbing his hand. Please forgive me. I only wanted to protect you." He tore his hand away, his voice hoarse. "Protect me? You destroyed me!" Her cry echoed through the hall. Guests stood frozen, unsure whether to comfort or stay away. The priest quietly closed his Bible, lowering his gaze. Thomas stepped forward quietly, standing beside me for support. He murmured softly, "You did what had to be done." But it didn't feel like victory. It felt like a funeral. The truth had been spoken, but it had shattered everyone in its path. Daniel sank to the floor beside Emily, his head in his hands. "We were planning a life together," he said through tears. "And now, it's nothing but ashes." I knelt beside him, my hand on his shoulder. "I'm sorry, son. I wish there had been another way." He didn't look up, but I felt his shoulders shake beneath my touch. Claire stayed on the floor, sobbing quietly, the sound of her guilt filling the entire hall. Guests began to leave in silence, whispering among themselves, faces pale, steps hesitant as though they'd witnessed something unholy. The music never resumed. The flowers wilted under the heat of the afternoon sun. The wedding that was supposed to begin a future had instead exhumed the past. As the crowd thinned, I looked one last time at my wife, the woman I once believed was the foundation of my family. Now she was just a stranger kneeling among broken vows and shattered hearts. And though the truth had saved my son, it had cost us everything else. The next morning the house was silent. Not the kind of silence that brings peace, but the kind that lingers after a storm has destroyed everything in its path. I sat at the dining table, staring at 2 untouched cups of coffee. The steam had faded hours ago, leaving behind nothing but cold, bitter liquid, a mirror of the hollow ache inside me. The wedding was cancelled. Guests had dispersed in stunned whispers, carrying pieces of our family's tragedy into the world. The decorations still hung, wilting in the morning light. The smell of flowers and spilled champagne filled the air, sweet yet sickening. Claire had left before dawn. No note, no explanation. Just her wedding ring left on the dresser beside a framed photo of the 3 of us, a photo that now felt like a lie. Daniel hadn't spoken a word since last night. He'd locked himself in his room. I could still hear faint sobs from behind his door, the kind that break a father's heart because they're too heavy to comfort. I wanted to knock, to hold him, to tell him that even though the truth hurt, it was better than living a lie. But how do you console someone when you're the one who tore his world apart, even if it was to save him? Thomas came by later that morning. He stood in the doorway, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. His face was drawn, weary. "You did the right thing," he said softly. "But the right thing doesn't always feel good, does it?" I shook my head slowly. "It feels like I set fire to my own home." He sighed. "Sometimes fire's the only way to cleanse what's rotten." His words hung heavy in the air. As the day went on, I walked through the remnants of what should have been a wedding. Ribbons still fluttered in the breeze. Half-burnt candles dripped wax down silver holders. Chairs were left in disarray, as if people had fled from the truth itself. On the floor near the altar lay the photograph, the one I had shown yesterday. The edges were crumpled now, faintly smudged with tears. I picked it up carefully. Claire's face smiled up at me, young and full of life, holding a little girl who had no idea she would grow up into the very person who nearly destroyed a family. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. Later that evening, Daniel finally opened his door. His eyes were red, his face pale, his voice quiet. "Dad, I don't know how to live with this." I stepped closer, unsure if he'd push me away. "One day at a time," I said. "That's all we can do." He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. "She lied to both of us, Mom, Emily. Everyone. I loved her. I was going to build a life with her. I know, I whispered. And she loved you too. That's what makes it so cruel. He looked up, pain burning in his eyes. I don't know how to forgive her. I exhaled slowly. You don't have to. Forgiveness isn't for her, it's for yourself so you can start breathing again. We sat in silence for a while. The sound of the clock ticking was the only proof that time was still moving forward. That night, when Daniel went to sleep, I stepped outside into the backyard. The sky was painted in soft orange and pink. The wind carried the faint scent of rain. I stood by the small fire pit, holding that photograph one last time. I kept every promise I made to you, I murmured to the memory of my wife. Except one. I couldn't protect him from your past. The flame flickered as I dropped the photo into the fire. The edges curled instantly, turning black before collapsing into ash. No more secrets, I whispered. The fire crackled softly, like a quiet agreement. Over the following weeks, Daniel and I began to rebuild, though the cracks remained. We spoke more. We cooked dinner together like we used to. He laughed sometimes, not often, but enough to remind me that hope still lived in him somewhere. One afternoon I found him in the garden, repairing the fence that had been broken for years. When he saw me, he smiled faintly. You were right, Dad, he said. Truth hurts, but lies kill everything. I nodded, pride welling up behind the ache in my chest. Your mother thought she was protecting you, I said quietly. But love built on lies is just another cage. He paused, hammer in hand, eyes distant. I don't hate her, I just can't look at her the same way. That's enough, I said. You don't have to hate, you just have to live. Thomas joined us for dinner that evening. He raised his glass to Daniel. To starting over, he said. Daniel smiled weakly. To starting over, he echoed. And for the first time in months, I felt a small spark of peace flicker to life. It wasn't forgiveness, it wasn't closure, but it was something. Days passed into weeks. The house felt lighter somehow. The laughter returned, hesitant at first, then fuller. One evening Daniel came into my study. He looked stronger, steadier. Dad, he said, I've been thinking, maybe it's time to sell the wedding hall decorations and donate the money to a charity for kids without families. Maybe that'll help me make peace. I smiled, tears stinging my eyes. Your mother would be proud of that. He hesitated, then stepped forward and hugged me. Tight, desperate, real. It was the first time in a long time I'd felt my son's arms around me without fear or distance between us. I love you, Dad, he said quietly. I love you too, son, I whispered. We'll be okay. The past is gone. We still have today. That night, I sat on the porch watching the sunset, a soft breeze brushing against my face. The sky burned gold, then purple, then black. I thought about everything we'd lost, and everything we'd saved. Maybe truth doesn't heal all wounds, but it keeps them from festering. Maybe it doesn't erase pain, but it gives pain a name, and names can be spoken, faced, overcome. As I looked up at the stars, I said quietly, the past can't be buried with silence. Only truth can free a family from its sins. The wind stirred gently, almost like an answer. And for the first time since that day in the living room, I didn't feel the weight of betrayal pressing down on me. I felt free